Okay guys, what I want to cover today is the Walksnail system and how to play back your DVR with a custom OSD font overlaid on the DVR when you're playing it back in the goggles or the VRX. Let's get started. So as you can see here, we've got a Betaflight OSD and it is using a built-in Betaflight font that is part of the firmware that comes with the Walksnail system. It's okay. It's not as pretty as what it could be, and you can see that it's active at the moment. You're getting, you can move the flight controller. You see the artificial horizon moving, etc. So, what do we do to make this look better? How do we install a custom font? Where do we get a custom font from? Um, let's start having a look at that process. So, if I open up a web browser and I go to this site here, which is my website for hosting custom fonts. I'll link it in the description of the YouTube. This covers, as you can see in the description, different flight control software as well as different HD video systems. So if we navigate this down, we're looking at Walksnail, and we're looking at Betaflight in this example. So in here, what I'm going to do is just download a couple of fonts and install one of them and show you what's what. So it's just a matter of coming down, downloading, and I will grab another one, and I'll grab Super Sneaky. So you can see them in my downloads. Okay, so getting rid of Chrome, we don't need that now. We have our 2-zip files, and what I'm going to do is grab the contents of, let's start with Nexus, and the 3 files that are in that I'm going to put onto the root of the SD card, and I've taken the SD card out of the VRX. It's empty, there's nothing on it, and I'm going to take the Nexus 3 files and I'm going to put them onto the root of the SD card. So here it is open here, and there are 3 files. One is an INI file that tells the install process information about these 2 files that we're loading up. So there are 2 files. There's one that's for a 720p camera setting, and the other one's for a 1080p camera setting. So taking this out of the VRX, out of the computer and putting it into the VRX. And we will hide Explorer window, so it's out of the way. And to install a font for your flight controller, you go into the menu and you go to Settings, Display, and come across to Font Update. And click OK. And after it's finished installing, you'll notice, or you may have noticed, this was set to BTFL here. That setting is automatically changed now to custom, and the custom font that we installed, which is Betaflight Nexus, is listed here under the custom font. So it's pre-selected it after the install. So what you normally do is you come in and after doing the install, you go to the OSD position, because by default it's not in center. So you go through and use your little joystick on top, at least on top of the VRX, to shift these around to typically the upper left position. And when we finish doing that, we just click the top button again and it saves that position. So it's centered. So you can see now that we've got a different font than what was used before, some color in it, looks a bit nicer, and you can see it's working. I'll move the flight controller, you can see the artificial horizon moving, etc. So what do we do from here? We can go and record. Actually, in the wrong setting here. So we hit the record button. We'll record for a few seconds so that when we play back, we can observe what the OSD is doing. I'll move the AHI artificial horizon around a little bit so you can see that it's active. Stop and recording. Now, you would hopefully expect, or reasonably expect, that when you come back into the menu after you've had a flight, I want to have a look at that, what I've just recorded, or if I've, got GPS settings and I've landed somewhere or crashed somewhere, I want to find out where I am, then I can go look at the OSD. So coming in here, making a note that this, in the top right, the OSD section must be enabled to display an OSD on your DVR playback. And if we come in here, you would expect to be able to see the OSD on the recording. There's nothing in there. It's not displaying it, although it's actually recorded an OSD file that is all of the OSD information that should be used to play it back. So coming back out of here, how do we fix that? Well, what we have to do is I'll take the SD card out of the VRX or the goggles, pop it back into the computer, and I want to edit. I want to edit the INI file that is part of the font install process, and we need to reinstall the font. This is a one-time thing. Once you understand what you need to do, you edit these things before you initially load. So you can see here that we've got you've got our we've got a recording of the flight, we've got an OSD file, and we've got a subtitle SRT file that has things to do with the megabits, distances, channels, etc. So if I open up the INI file, we can see that the content of it is broken up into two sections. One is a header section, and then we have its own sections, or section in this case, based on the configuration of that font, so that when it gets installed, it's information that gets used when to display or installed. So what we've got here, we've got a count of one font that we're installing in this INI file. That font name is BTFL Nexus, and we have a section that refers to that BTFL Nexus that contains the information about how to install it for the Goggle firmware. So we've got a 720p image, we've got a 1080p image, and these are the image names that are used inside the SD card when you install it. So they refer to the different resolutions for your camera. Okay, so when I create these files, or when I create the fonts, because you can install more than one, they should be uniquely named. So when I create them and save them, I give them a unique name. So the downside of that is that to have the firmware display the custom font in playback, it needs to have a special name. And that special name for Betaflight is BTFL. So if I simply change this name to BTFL, and I save this, what happens then is that when I reinstall this font, so I will take the SD card out now and put it into the VRX, and we'll go through reinstalling that same font again. This time the name of it when it installs will be a little bit different. It'll be BTFL. So coming into the menu, display, font update, and you can see right now the custom font name is BTFL Nexus. And when I go through this process, everything that's in that ini file overwrites what's on the goggles or the VRX. And you can see that now has changed to BTFL. So if I go back out of here to playback with that same file, haven't re-recorded anything. It is simply what I used before. Select that file for playback. You can see that we have an OSD during the playback. Now it's a little bit off center because I haven't gone through the process of changing the default, or maybe not the default, but changing the location of the OSD. So if I change that and correct it, the position of the OSD on the DVR will be corrected as well. Okay, so if we were to install, if I saw on the website I wanted to have a look at, a different font, I want to swap between them during flying sessions, etc., we can easily do that. So I'll take the SD card out of the VRX and I will pop it into the computer again. And finding where I've got that. So the downloads, I downloaded the Nexus one and also downloaded the Super Sneaky font. So if I go into here and I can take these three files and put it back onto the USB drive or the SD card. But the problem with that is it's going to overwrite the ini file that we've just changed or edited. So what I want to do in this case, I want to take the two image files only and put them onto the root of the SD card with the other two files. So you can see we've got them there now alongside the Nexus ones. And if I want to also install the Super Sneaky font at the same time as the Nexus font, then I need to edit the ini file. And the content of the ini file, we need to make some changes. And those changes are, we're now loading two fonts, and we have the second font will be called, let's just call it BTFL _ super. So we've got a number one here that refers to this section, and we need a new section for number two. So what I'm going to do is open up the Super Sneaky ini file and just take that information out of it, pop it down here, and we call this BTFL super, so I'm just going to call it super. So the image name here refers to the image that you would see on the root of the drive. So as long as these files exist when the ini file is loaded or when the install process happens, you'll be fine. So one is called BTFL and one is called super. So if I save that, and if I just to stop this disappearing, take that out, and pop it back into VRX. And I go to our menu, settings, display, update fonts. It has installed both of those theoretically. Now we can have a look at to make sure by coming down to this font, custom font selection here and cycling through so we can see BTFL Super, and it will switch between those two. So I can come down to BTFL Super, and if I come out of here, you'll notice that the OSD is based on that super sneaky font. So that's how you install multiples. You'll need to go in and move each of these individually around after you've installed them. They should retain that position, I think. When we're on the new version of the firmware that is due out soon, and I don't know what soon means, but I've been told soon, the default position of the OSD when it loads will be changed to the top left-hand corner. So in your OSD position screen, at the moment it defaults to where it is as you see it there, and when we get the new firmware, hopefully we'll be seeing it default up to the top left, so you won't have to go through this process every time, which for someone who develops fonts is mildly annoying, as you would understand. So once that's up there, and back to the menu, saving that position. When we come out of there, we'll be in the right positioning. Now, with the ordering of the fonts in terms of the INI file, the one that is, let's talk about a couple of things here. The one that is position number one, will be loaded and defaulted to after loading. The one that is called BTFL for Betaflight will be the one that is used for DVR playback, regardless of what font you have active when you're recording. The one that is BTFL will be the one that's used when you're playing back your DVR. So if you were unsure about, using a different flight control software, you're unsure about what you should be naming it to come back to be able to be played back in DVR, there's a couple of ways you can do that, and we'll have a look at that. So one way is to, let me just hide this for a moment, is to go into the goggles or the VRX, and if you are on settings and display, provided that you have all of the OSD appearing correctly in the goggles, and you're getting things that are valid coming from your flight controller. If you change this to be, let me just go back there, this zoom function, if you change it to 10%, you'll get a debug OSD. Now that debug OSD has information on it about your flight controller and version, amongst other things. So you can see the last red line there is the flight controller BTFL. So that BTFL is the identifier for your flight controller. And that means that when you create your INI file, that is the naming that you want to use to have a successful font being played back, a custom font being played back in the DVR on the goggles or on the VRX. So I mentioned there's two ways. So the second way is that, let me just hide this. I'll take the SD card out of the goggles and I will put it into the computer. Bear with me. Okay, so we've got the SD card in the computer, and you can see that we've got the recording of the DVR and an OSD and an SRT file. If we open up the DVR or the OSD file, the first four characters of the OSD file at the moment on current firmware, which is 33.39.10, you will find that that is the identifier that is used for the flight controller. So you can either look at the on-screen debug menu and set it 10% to see that value, or you can look at the .osd file and you'll know which flight controller was used to record the OSD for the DVR that is recorded. So that's the second way you can do that. So at the moment, there are some issues, shortcomings of the OSD and display of the OSD. One is that you only have a limited ability to install up to 3 custom fonts at any one time. That's a total. So you can have one Betaflight, one INAV, one Ardupilot, or you can have 3 Betaflight, or you can have, a mixture of those. In the future, with the next firmware, there is an intent to be able to install more custom fonts, so that those pilots that have multi-rotors as well as Ardupilot, fixed wing craft, or INAV fixed wing can have all of those fonts installed so that they don't have to reinstall things on the day if they want to change fonts around. The other thing that to be note is that at the moment there is a issue with the firmware, the current firmware, that INAV is not supported fully. The reason for that is that INAV has what is called 2 pages in the OSD font, and a page consists of 256 OSD glyphs. So there's a total of 512 positions available with an INAV font, and the current firmware doesn't know how to position itself with the second page of OSD in a custom font. That also impacts the QuickSilver firmware as well. That is considered a 2-page font as well, because there are some glyphs on a second page of the QuickSilver firmware that essentially turns some of the lettering in a negative fashion. So, the text is black instead of white. The other one that is soon to be coming out is a Betaflight 4-page font that has different coloring for values based on warnings or warning or information levels that come from the flight controller. So when that comes out, I'll demonstrate that with a 4-page font that's specifically crafted for Betaflight 4.4 and its support of a 4-page font with different coloring. So that concludes what I want to talk about today. Hope you found this useful. A number of things will be addressed with regards to custom fonts in the next version of the firmware that I'm working with the Walksnail devs on improving in terms of custom fonts. So watch this space, and certainly expect another video out from me when that new firmware gets released, particularly on some of the things that have been improved across INAV, Betaflight, etc. Anyway, take care.